The U.S. Senate Committee on Energy and Natural Resources will come to order. I'm obviously filling in for Chairman Manchin this morning, who expects to be here later today. I want to thank Chief Moore for being here today. In the last 18 months, Congress has provided you with more than $250 million increase in annual appropriations, an additional $5.4 billion in bipartisan infrastructure law, an additional $5 billion in the Inflation Reduction Act. These are timely and vital investments. In February, the President's Council of Advisors of Science and Technology issued a report to the President noting that more than 100 million Americans now live in areas that are threatened by wildfires. And as the Government Accountability Office noted last week, between January and October of last year, nearly 60,000 wildfires affected 7.2 million acres of land. GAO noted that the length of the fire season and frequency of fires are increasing, while more people and infrastructure are at risk from these wildfires. Chief Moore, I know you are excited to discuss the proposed budget and how to meet those challenges. We too want to discuss those priorities because fire season is fast approaching. While I'm relieved to see the National Interagency Fire Center has not yet predicted a dangerous fire season for the West, an area facing significant wildfire risk is the central Washington part of our state. This is home to a very highly productive agriculture part of our state, and I want to better understand how the Forest Service is going to help rural communities in central Washington prevent and protect and recover from wildfire season. As we consider the Forest Service budget today, it's important to discuss how the Forest Service is spending historic investments made last Congress and how additional funding the administration is seeking would bolster our investments. I would like to start by commending you on the legislative proposal included in your budget to address a number of the problems facing wildland firefighters. I appreciate your setting up a new pay table for these workers, building off the successes of the bipartisan infrastructure bill and your stated desire to hire 970 more men and women to fill these roles. As we work through this, I do want to make sure that the funding and that we are cognizant of what the funding is going to take to make these proposals a reality. I am told there is not a lot of cushion in the wildfire contingency reserve that we enacted 5 years ago as part of the fire borrowing fix. And as everyone knows, we wanted to quit borrowing from the fund and actually do the work that would help us prevent some of the fires from being at that catastrophic level. I was commenting to Senator Barrasso and thanking him for him coming to Seattle and us having a subcommittee hearing on wildland fire fighting then, after we had seen devastating fires in the same central Washington part of our state. And so these are very, very important issues. Senators Wyden, Risch, and I, along with others, worked hard to successfully end the practice of fire borrowing, and we must ensure that the Forest Service does not return to that practice of robbing non-fire accounts to cover fire costs. Lastly, I was surprised and disappointed to see that your proposal did not include anything in regards to your requirements under the Dingell Act to provide firefighters with the best technology for fighting fires and keeping firefighters safe. The Dingell Act, which required Forest Service to equip firefighters with technologies that are meant to prove safety, I see nothing with regard to this requirement in the Forest Service proposal, so we'll have a chance to ask in Q&A about that. I would like to acknowledge a few other components of your budget proposal that are important to my state. For example, I appreciate this year's budget establishment of a permanent program to fund rehabilitation work after wildfires. The Burned Area Response Program will be able to provide more resources to areas impacted by wildfire, like those impacted by the Bull Creek fire that shut down Highway 2 in Washington last year after the fire burned the mountain slope just above the highway. These are really important areas to keeping communities operating, and in this case, a very vital link between the east and west part of our state open and moving. I also appreciate the discussion in your budget about the inventory, the old growth stands on the National Forest, and your proposed investment in the outdoor recreation funding is historic. Outdoor recreation employs over 114,000 people in the state of Washington, and according to the Bureau of Economic Analysis, this sector grew by 8.7% over the last year. So we love the outdoor economy. It's continuing to grow, and we're working with our colleagues to try to very specifically focus on trail funding. But we are still falling short of what we need to do, because these are many family day trips, many backpacking adventures that many people come to Washington for, and many people in Washington want to enjoy. So with that, there's a lot to talk about in the Q&A and a lot to hear from our witnesses on. I'll now turn it over to the ranking member, Senator Barrasso, for his opening remarks. And thanks again for your long-stead interest in these issues and paying attention to them and being willing to come to Washington after one of our big fire seasons. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. Thank you for today's hearing and the Forest Service budget request. Chief Moore, welcome back to the committee. Glad to have you here today. We're looking forward to hearing how the proposed budget intends to further the critical mission of the agency. I'm pleased with some of your priorities within the budget request. For example, there's funding to protect our forests from catastrophic fire, as the chairman just said, providing badly needed pay increases to our brave firefighters. We have a number of them here with us today. I also do have some significant concerns. In the last 2 years, Congress has provided over $10 billion additional dollars to the Forest Service. The budget proposes massive increases in new spending. You know, your request for $7.4 billion in discretionary appropriations would amount to a 52% increase over current funding levels. In an era of historic budget deficits, the Forest Service, I think, really needs to prioritize. To be clear, the Forest Service faces enormous challenges in the fight against wildfires. 1/3 of our national forests are at serious risk to being consumed by catastrophic fires. There's broad agreement among members of this committee, both sides of the aisle, that the historic forest fire treatment levels are historically and totally inadequate to meet the challenge. While I support robust funding for the efforts, I'm not convinced that we can simply just spend our way out of problems that have plagued the forest for decades. The Forest Service needs to fully embrace efforts to streamline its processes for approving projects that improve forest health. The agency needs to more aggressively defend against harmful litigation that prevents projects from moving forward. Far too often, when extreme environmental groups sue, vital wildfire reduction projects get tied up in the court and don't get accomplished. I'm also deeply troubled by what appears to be the intentional exclusion of Wyoming from major Forest Service initiatives aimed at reducing wildfire risk. In its 10-year strategy to combat the wildfire crisis, the agency has announced significant spending across 21 designated areas. These dollars fund projects that are critical for reducing wildfire risk and defending America's forests. They're going to protect people's lives and livelihoods. Inexplicably, Wyoming is the only state located on or west of the Rocky Mountains that has not received funding under this strategy. The only state of all of those. Further, Wyoming is the only western state to be excluded from the Wildland Fire Mitigation and Management Commission. This is a commission created by Congress to help improve strategies to prevent, to manage, to suppress, and to recover from wildfires. That's why in March of last year, I, along with the rest of the Wyoming delegation, sent a letter specifically requesting that Wyoming be represented on the commission. Here we are a year later. Wyoming is still not represented. This is a pattern of neglect and simply must change. Much like other western states, Wyoming is highly vulnerable to wildfires. According to the Forest Service estimates, more than 4 million acres of Wyoming forests are at either high or very high risk to catastrophic wildfires. And we've seen the tragic results of the failure to properly manage these acres. In 4 of the past 5 years, Wyoming has been hit by numerous destructive fires. In 2020 alone, we experienced nearly 340,000 burned acres. Now, that's a land larger than 1/3 of the entire state of the President's home state of Delaware. We're talking about a large area of land. Today, our communities remain in harm's way. According to the Forest Service website, wildfirerisk.org, towns in Wyoming like Du Bois, Jackson, Buffalo, Lander, and Saratoga, are all at high risk to destructive wildfires. So I believe the people of Wyoming deserve better protection. And at the very least, they deserve the same protections that every other western state is getting. Thanks so much, Madam Chairman. I look forward to the questioning and hearings today.
Chief Moore, welcome again. Thank you for being here. We look forward to your testimony.
Thank you, and Chairwoman Cantwell, Ranking Member Barrasso, and members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to testify before you today. I appreciate the opportunity to share how the Forest Service is putting America's money to work. The fiscal year 2024 request focuses on three primary areas: modernizing the wildland fire management system, confronting the wildfire crisis, and ensuring equitable access to and benefits from the National Forest System. The people we serve deserve nothing less than to see the value of their money at work for their benefit. National forests and grasslands cover about 193 million acres, some 180 million people in over 68,000 communities, and they rely on these lands to capture and filter their drinking water. Our work contributes to over 373,000 jobs and $40.3 billion to the GDP. We work with tribes, states, and local governments, private landowners, and many other partners across the country to keep forests and grasslands healthy and safe. Today, America's forests face dire threats from wildfire, climate change, and insects and disease, especially in the West. This is an emergency situation in many places, and we are acting with a sense of urgency in collaboration with communities and our partners. Our top priority is to reduce the wildfire threats by safeguarding communities and critical infrastructure and creating healthy, resilient forests. Through our wildfire crisis strategy, we've ramped up to treat the right places at the right scale using an all-hands, all-lands approach. This past January, we announced investments of $930 million in 21 high-risk landscapes in the West, benefiting roughly 200 communities and many other resources that people value. In addition to this, we've awarded nearly $200 million in community wildfire defense grants towards 100 projects to 22 states and 7 tribes, including to the Crooked Creek Community Fuels Mitigation Project in Wyoming. Recent investments by Congress give us a historic opportunity to take bold and strategic action. We are working to do just that, to put every dollar to good use. We're grateful to Congress and this committee in particular for investing foundational funding to do this work. Sustained execution depends on continued federal investments. The proposed FY24 budget responds to this need. This budget also calls for a $1.4 billion investment in salaries, health, safety, and well-being for firefighters. A suite of new actions will permanently increase pay, improve options for housing, and provide better care and support for physical and mental health. It also increases the number of firefighters. While firefighters represent the backbone of our wildfire system, we also need active and aggressive land management to confront the wildfire crisis. This budget invests $300 million in hazardous fuel treatments. It supports execution of the wildfire crisis strategy. It targets investments in burn area rehabilitation for $56 million to expedite recovery from wildfire. It supports use of the latest research and grants to universities to support educational and technical assistance for innovative wood products, including a recent award to West Virginia University for the conceptual design of the first mass timber building using heartwood. National forests and grasslands belong to every American. We're grateful for the Great American Outdoor Act funds that help to reduce our $7.7 billion maintenance backlog and ensure public access. Every person should feel a personal invitation and connection to these lands. We remain committed to removing barriers so all people can enjoy National Forest System lands and services, particularly tribal and underserved communities. We continue to focus policies, accountability, and training to ensure an equitable, respectful, and harassment-free workforce. We know what's at stake if we don't address the effects of climate change and the wildfire crisis. The health of our forests and communities, clean water, a vibrant wood products industry, and jobs and resources that Americans depend on. We need to act now to meet the challenges before us. Thank you, and I'm grateful for your support, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you. Mr. Lichtenstein, are you making a statement?
No, ma'am.
Just here to take the hard questions?
Yes, indeed.
Okay, all right, well, let's get started. I wanted to start with this year's fire season question. The Forest Service has put out an announcement that might make most parts of Washington feel pretty good about what's happening, but the central part of our state, which is a very big ag economy, $2 billion worth of agricultural products, seems to be right in the epicenter of what people are saying will be the hot spot. You might put the whole map up for the rest of the U.S. Okay. So again, it can definitely, my colleague from Oregon, I'm sure, will show up and communicate about what this forecast is showing for Oregon. But, you know, we have a very big apple, pears, hops, cherries, wine industry in this part of the United States. So we really want to know about your workforce and firefighting budget. Right now, firefighters have to work hundreds of hours of overtime. And how is your proposed increase going to help us address what we're facing here in the central part of Washington and in Oregon?
So, Chairwoman Cantwell, that was about 3 questions into one, and so I'll try and address them.
Well, I have 3 more. I got this, because I definitely want to ask you about the inventory of old growth. I want to ask you why you haven't implemented the technology, and definitely want to ask you about, you know, the trails issue. But for now, I'm really giving you a softball, which is you want more people. I'm saying you want more people. By the way, I want to recognize we have a bunch of firefighters here, particularly from the Mount Baker Snoqualmie Forest, so thank you for being here. Thanks for what you guys ever do. I noticed when I talked about Bolt Creek, they were nodding, because they know how bad that fire literally caused now a problem with shutting down Highway 2. So these are really integral day-to-day. So what can we do on the workforce side to make sure that we have the personnel here and ready to fight this fire season?
Yeah. So excellent question. So as we approach the busiest part of the fire year 2023 for this year, the Forest Service is really aspiring to have about 11,300 firefighters on board. We know that we need additional capacity, which is why we're requesting additional capacity in the FY24 President's budget. And we're requesting funding for an additional 970 firefighters and support personnel. This really reinforces the need to enact pay, housing, mental health, and other reforms proposed in the FY24 President's budget to effectively recruit and retain wildland firefighters. Housing is a really big issue, and it's an issue of availability, but also affordability. And so we are working feverishly to work with Congress, and we'd be happy to follow up with you to look at what some options that we are currently trying to explore, but to also look to see and work together on other options that we might want to pursue. But it's a significant issue, not only in recruitment of firefighters, but retention of firefighters. Great.
Well, I think what we'd like, and maybe Mr. Lichtenstein can add some value to this and get us an answer, but what I talked to my statement, I'm sure you have statistics about what we're seeing as an increase in fire season, the risk, the burn, the damage, the economic impact. And so I think we can put that into some sort of percentage, and if you say, and if you don't have the workforce to combat it, this is how much more challenging it'll be. And so I guess that's what we're looking for, but we'll come back on that. On the DINGLE-AC, on the technology side, I noticed the president issued a report modernizing wildland firefighting to protect firefighters, and the president's quote was, immediate needs that can be addressed with the existing technologies to ensure that our firefighters do not have to face tomorrow's fires with yesterday's tools. So we passed the DINGLE-AC several years ago. So when are we going to have these new tools for firefighters this year on technology, on mapping, on communication?
So, Chairwoman Cantwell, we have deployed trackers in certain areas, and we are working through the interoperability in other areas. We're also issuing and developing standards for their use. We'll be deploying resource trackers on our fire and our fleet vehicles this fiscal year, and we plan to operationalize the wildland firefighter trackers in 2024. We're also working with the Colorado Center of Excellence to develop team awareness kits that really provides a common operating picture for the crews as they work on these incidents.
Well, I can't emphasize enough how important this technology and information is. You may know we were very involved, particularly when it came to weather forecasting, because we, again, what turned into be a deadly fire in the central part of the state, and a forecaster that basically said, yeah, go deploy people. But people in Seattle were definitely saying, no, you shouldn't have deployed people. The winds were that high. So we got to get the right information in the hands of people who are on the ground taking the risk. And so we will follow up with you and get even more specificity on what the resources can be that we need to make sure this is implemented. Senator Barrasso.
Thanks so much, Madam Chairman. Chief Moore, last month I sent a letter to you along with Senator Lummis from Wyoming, Representative Hageman. We sent you the letter as well as Secretary Vilsack. The letter details our concern over our home state, Wyoming's exclusion from the 10-year strategy to address the wildfire crisis. We have a map here. You see in bright red, those are the areas that are designated. We saw your map, Madam Chairman. These are the areas that have been designated for wildfire mitigation under the strategy that you've outlined. Every state west of the Rocky Mountains has designated areas except the state of Wyoming. What is the rationale? When I've already outlined earlier how many acres have burned and the threats that we have in Wyoming and the places even on your own website where there are threats for Wyoming, why in the world would Wyoming be excluded from these designations?
So let me say up front, Senator, there's no reason I could give you that you would accept simply because Wyoming appears to be missing. I will say that we have other ways of working in Wyoming, and we are working in Wyoming in other ways through the collaboratives. You're getting quite a bit of funding there. We're also looking at wildland-urban interface areas where we've had members from the different states and tribes evaluating the proposals. We had 100 proposals for this work. And so, you know, this is the first round. We awarded a little over $200 million, but we have up to $1 billion to award. So the fact that you don't have anything currently doesn't mean that you won't be getting anything in the future. But I will say, too, though, that you're pointing out the need for us to continue in this effort that we're doing. And as much money as we are receiving, and we are very thankful to Congress for that, it is not enough to take care of the problems to the degree that we see them taking place, particularly across the West. So this down payment that we have through the bill funding and the IRA funding is a good down payment, and it's very much appreciated, but it's not enough to hit all of the areas out west. Our intent is to make sure that we do not leave Wyoming out in this picture that we're trying to create in terms of how we're responding to wildfires. And so, Senator, I would just say that for right now, you didn't get one of the 21 landscapes, but please understand that there is so much other work going on outside of the 21 landscapes where Wyoming is benefiting.
So is the Forest Service planning to designate areas in Wyoming in the future?
I don't know, but we'd certainly be happy to work with you as we take a look at what are the possibilities. And I can say with certainty that if there's another round of funding, that Wyoming would certainly be one of the landscapes that we focus on.
You know, the first time we met, it was to discuss the situation of the Black Hills National Forest. At the time, our local sawmills were teetering on the brink of collapse. Some had actually ended up closing down or reducing their hours. This was due in large part to the Forest Service actions that dramatically lowered the timber harvest levels. Since our meeting, I've been encouraged by many of your actions to help address the dire situation, but still there's a long way to go in order to ensure the long-term viability of the remaining sawmills. Your state partners in Wyoming and South Dakota really stand ready to help. How might your agency find ways to further leverage the good efforts that the people of Wyoming and South Dakota are engaged in right now?
So, Senator, we've been working really hard with the state agencies as well as other partners to really look at just the viability of the industry going forward. And while we are focusing on wood innovations moving into the future, we also have to look at retaining existing infrastructure. And so we have a pilot project that the Black Hills is tied into where we are moving timber from one part of the country to other parts of the country to maintain its viability. And so we'll continue to do that. I'm really pleased with the success and the progress that we've had to date on that project. And I would really like to encourage other parts of the country to look at this pilot program that we're working on between South Dakota, Wyoming, and California.
Yeah, we're hoping that the agency could use its good neighbor authority to allow states to help complete needed permitting reviews themselves, do it themselves without having to go further.
We're certainly working toward that. In fact, we have 37 states where we have good neighbor authority agreements in place.
Thanks, Madam Chairman. I have some questions for a second round.
Thank you, Senator Barrasso. Senator Heinrich.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And let me just start by saying this hearing's about the Forest Service's budget, and any budget is reflective of our values and our priorities. And if we believe that fuel treatments are critical, then we need to fund those projects. And I believe it's clear that not adequately funding this agency's budget will clearly result in more catastrophic wildfires. We can't have it both ways. Congress needs to step up and help you have the resources to address these issues. Now, Chief, as you know, northern New Mexico experienced the Hermit's Peak Calf Canyon fire last spring. That was a prescribed fire run amok. It was the most devastating and largest fire in our state's history. We just passed the one-year anniversary of that fire, and the communities in this area are still, in my opinion, in the very early stages of recovery. And that recovery is critical to rebuilding trust with the service. One of the concerns that I'm hearing about is whether last year's flood mitigation efforts on Forest Service land will be sufficient to keep downstream communities from flooding. So I want to ask you, one, are you confident that the work over the summer and the fall will be sufficient? And secondly, will the Forest Service continue to mulch and seed, continue mulching and seeding treatments this spring?
Yeah, so Senator, let me first acknowledge the extraordinary impacts that these events have had on the people and the communities in New Mexico. I've personally gone out to tour the area, and the impacts have been really devastating in many of the communities that you serve and that we serve in general. The Forest Service and USDA in general is actively working with the state and FEMA to monitor the results of our treatments that we put in place last year, and also to look at what are the potential risks for flooding and how the work that we've done last year might be affected. So we're working on a joint project, joint mitigation response, and we have a team that is in place to monitor the impacts that this spring's runoff would have on that work that was done.
Are you planning on additional mulching and seeding treatments this spring?
Yeah, let me say also that the work that we did last year and the funding that we received to do that work last year, we did complete that work. And so, as I said, now what we need to do is monitor the effectiveness of the work that we did. Going forward, particularly looking at the supplemental funding, that will allow us to fund more work in the coming years, depending on how effective.
So for places where it's found not to be effective, you'll go in and do more work?
Well, what it does, it gives us a long-term option to repair the damage from the fires. The supplemental dollars are really useful, but they're not necessarily timely. And that's the issue with trying to get the emergency disaster work done in a timely manner before the spring storms hit, so that we can hold this in place. But we're pretty optimistic so far on the work. The communities have really just gone above and beyond working with us and USDA in general in terms of the state setting aside funding to supplement what the feds are doing. The communities are coming out, developing community groups to work with us and to help point us in the right direction. And one of the impacts that we've seen, and I may get the pronunciation wrong, being from the South, but the Testifies,
Pretty close.
that has been damaged significantly through a lot of the fires that was in the uplands. And so we toured those areas, and we do think it's a is a tragic situation, and we're committed, Senator, to trying to replace the damaged resources that was done through that fire.
If resources are an issue, I want to hear from you, Chief, because the only way we're going to rebuild trust is to make sure that we see this through for the long term. It's been almost 3 years ago now that Congress passed the Great American Outdoors Act, and that made Land and Water Conservation Fund funding permanent. Now that funding through LWCF is guaranteed and it's predictable, how quickly is the Forest Service able to move to closing on projects? And in particular, for 21 and 22, how much of the Forest Service's land acquisition budget from LWCF has actually gone out the door versus projects that are still in the closing process?
So let me say, going into this, though, that, our processes served us well in the past. And what I'm finding more often than not is that the processes that we use, it needs to be streamlined. And you take the situation that you just mentioned right now is taking about 3 years. The process is complicated, so there's no mistake about that. But we're looking at our policies and streamlining approaches to really work to streamline that, because we're seeing where other entities can get this done in a much quicker fashion. And so the logical question is, then why can't we? And so we're interested in working with you and to see if we can't work quicker on these areas. But Senator, we're committed to streamlining as much as we possibly can, like we've done in other areas so far, because we do want to meet Congress's intent when they allocate monies to us. And we do want to show that we're a good place to make an investment.
Thank you. Senator Daines.
Senator Cantwell, thank you. Wildfires are already burning. They're currently burning in the southern and southwest areas of the country. I think over 300,000 acres have already burned. And while this is occurring, needed forest management work that will decrease the risk of catastrophic wildfires is delayed across the West by litigation. In fact, in Montana alone, there are over 300 million board feet tied up by litigation. If we are serious about maintaining healthy forests and ending the cycle of these catastrophic wildfires that we see every summer, we must, number one, cut red tape to speed up the NEPA process. You talked about the process and how long it takes just now, Chief. Two, empower states, empower counties, empower our tribes to better manage our national forests through partnerships like the Good Neighbor Authority. And three, continue to hold the Forest Service accountable for commitments they make. So, Chief Moore, thanks for being here today to discuss the Forest Service budget request. Back in 2018, Congress did pass a partial fix to the Ninth Circuit's Cottonwood decision, but this fix expired in March. In fact, it was exactly March 23rd, 2023. The Forest Service has testified that 87 forest plans, 87, will have to immediately reinitiate consultation with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and this consultation will take between 5 to 10 years to finish, and it's going to cost tens of millions of dollars. How does the reconsultation requirement on these 87 forest plans, Chief Moore, impact the Forest Service ability to complete work on your 10-year wildfire strategy?
Well, Senator, first, I thank you for your help and support on this issue. I think it almost goes without saying that if we have to divert a lot of our resources and attention to reconsulting at the plan level with Fish and Wildlife and others, that is going to have an impact on what we are planning to do throughout this year. And the wildfire crisis strategy is our priority. Getting resources in for our firefighters, you're looking at mental health. I mentioned earlier all those things that we're trying to do, as well as hiring and retaining a lot of our firefighters, but also our workforce in general. that would be taken away from our ability to implement a lot of the things that we have planned for this year. So it would be a huge impact.
Yeah, we were warning the folks up here on the Hill about that expiration. That's why we need to get that Ninth Circuit Cottonwood fix passed, because this looming deadline that now has expired last month. And now that it has expired, would you agree that a full and permanent Cottonwood solution should be a high priority and a bipartisan priority for this Congress?
Yes, sir, I do.
Thanks, and I look forward to working with my colleagues, continue to work with you to get this legislation across the finish line. In 2021, Congress provided the Forest Service with a new categorical exclusion for linear fuel breaks and a new emergency authority to expedite projects to avert or respond to catastrophic wildfires. The Forest Service reported using the linear fuel break authority, but only this year did Secretary Vilsack invoke the other new emergency authority across 250 high-risk fire sheds that the Forest Service has now identified. 23 of these high-risk fire sheds are in Montana, and we split a 24th with Idaho. So it's important that this emergency authority be used to get management work done on the ground. My question, Chief Moore, how many requests have you received from regions to use this new emergency authority, and how many of these have you approved, or what do you anticipate the timeline might be?
So, Senator, so far we've had 8 requests to come in. We've approved 6 of those.
And how might these linear fuel breaks, categorical exclusions, have they actually used, and in which regions?
Well, so for context, let me say in general, right now about 85% of our projects use categorical exclusion. And if you want to know in terms of a number, that's about 4,000 CEs per year that we're using on average. And that's a pretty significant increase from a few years ago. So we are looking at streamlining. We are looking at using the appropriate tool depending on the situation out on that landscape. We are looking to continue trying to streamline our process. As I mentioned that earlier, that's one of my priorities, is to look where can we streamline our processes to really get the work done at that ground level than really spending so much time planning.
Yeah.
I think we have a pretty good bead on planning. We see where we have some opportunities to decrease the amount of time that we're spending on that, and we're also seeing productivity increasing out in the field when we're able to do that.
Thank you, Chief Moore. Senator Cantwell, thank you. We'll look forward to work with you on that Ninth Circuit Cottonwood fix. Talk about streamlining. It's adding 5 to 10 years of additional time right now. That's a golden opportunity for us to take advantage of right now in this Congress. I hope we can do it and help you on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Hirono.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chief Moore, it's good to see you again. Yeah. I appreciate your attentiveness to Hawaii and the Pacific region, and note that state natural resource managers back home tell me that they have a good working relationship with the Forest Service. We are always looking for new opportunities to strengthen those relationships, one of which is through potentially establishing a national forest in Hawaii. As the bill requiring the study was signed into law late last year, can you provide an update on where the Forest Service is in conducting the study? And going forward, can you provide me with quarterly updates on the study?
Sure. So we expect to contract out and complete the study within the next 90 days. And I do think quarterly updates would be logical and practical, but Senator, also know that anytime you'd like to have an update, we'd be happy to provide you with one.
Thank you very much. The use of natural infrastructure is becoming an increasingly popular and effective alternative to more traditional gray infrastructure solutions throughout our country. I currently have a bill that directs the Forest Service and U.S. Geological Survey to establish a joint natural infrastructure science program that would work with colleges and universities to supply the necessary research on natural infrastructure solutions. Can you discuss in general the Forest Service's experience with using natural infrastructure and the role you see it playing in future projects?
So this is a critical a piece that we should be looking at, and I think there's a critical role for natural infrastructure in protecting and sustaining, particularly source watersheds, as we talk about. The research topics with, which our Forest Service scientists and collaborators can primarily address are those involving wood building materials and the use of wood to enhance other building material.
So would you support the establishment of a joint natural infrastructure science program? Because I find that working with universities, or in fact even with students in high school and in earlier grades where they are exposed to these kinds of methods, really plays a big part in our contending with the changes that are the need to protect our environment. So would you support such a science program?
Yes, of course I would, Senator.
Okay. Good. There is also broad interest in establishing a climate hub in Hawaii to promote more localized tools and resources in the Pacific region. And of course, the lessons learned in Hawaii through the creation of such a hub would have applicability to island nations throughout the Pacific, because we are all contending with the impact of climate change. So additional funding is needed to make such a hub a reality, as identified in the Agricultural Research Services FY24 budget request, and I'm currently working with my colleagues to secure that funding. Can you discuss the role that climate hubs play in helping producers and land managers adapt to climate change, and do you expect stakeholders' demand for these hubs to increase in the future?
I do expect for the demand to increase in the future. One of the examples from a USDA Southwest Climate Hub here is the Pacific Drought Knowledge Exchange website. This enables collaborative relationships, among drought stakeholders in Hawaii and the Pacific Island nations. And it also provides a clear factual information for educational purposes, staff training, and also community outreach.
So these hubs work to bring, I think, a focused attention on that kind of work, and I hope that you will support our efforts to fund such a hub in Hawaii. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Cortez Masto.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chief Moore, it's good to see you again. Thank you for being here. I don't think that you had a choice, but thank you. Let me start, because you talked a little, you've been hearing about this. Our fire seasons have become a year-round reality, as you've heard, particularly in the West and in Nevada as well. Threatening lives, property, small businesses. It's critical now more than ever that we provide our firefighters with support and tools they need to combat these wildfires that are hotter and longer, as we see happening. Accordingly, the Forest Service's fiscal year 24 budget request notes your agency's intent to build on the bipartisan infrastructure law, which you talked about today, as well as last year's budget request to enhance compensation for our wildland firefighters. Every time I meet with our local firefighters in Nevada, they express their concerns to me about the ability to recruit, to train, and retain their workforce. Salaries, benefits, and housing, you talked a little bit about that, are strong components that obviously need greater attention. So can you please provide me with an update on these previously appropriated funds and tell us how firefighters are seeing the benefits of increased funding for wildland firefighter compensation? So
thank you, Senator. To date, everything that the firefighters are beginning to see is temporary. The FY24 budget is proposed to make these permanent shifts. And the permanent shifts is looking at pay, it's looking at housing, and it's looking at mental care and well-being. And it also would make these pieces permanent. So we are hopeful that this budget will pass as is. And it's no secret that we've had a recruitment and retention problem. Even last year, when we were trying to hire up to 11,300 firefighters, we had a lot of issues, and it's geographic in nature in many cases. But in my experience, particularly coming out of California, you had other entities paying 2 and sometimes 3 times the salaries that the Forest Service and the federal government really was paying our firefighters. And these are people that is at the low end of the paying scale that are really on the ground sucking smoke and dirt for most of the time that they on this fire. And, you know, there's no way that I could ever be okay with what we pay our firefighters and not push with everything I have to try and have a more of an equitable program, and that the wildland firefighters and the Forest Service are well paid, they're well cared for. We're looking out at the communities that we serve and protect, but they can't afford to live in those communities that we serve and protect.
So Chief, can I, because I've only got a few minutes, so your goal is with this fiscal year budget to make sure, though, that you're increasing that compensation, those benefits, it's permanent, that's one, correct? And then you talked about housing and mental health, which is areas that I also want to focus on. What are you specifically doing about the housing issue? And how can we help?
So we put together a team, a national team, to really look at the housing issue, and we're piloting in some areas. The White River National Forest in Colorado is one of the areas where we're piloting a long-term program where we're working with the communities to build houses for our firefighters in exchange for the lands. We are very optimistic about that. We're also looking at other areas across the country where we can engage the community into helping us find solutions to this problem, because the communities benefit as much as anyone in maintaining a firefighter's support into their communities.
So when you say in exchange for the land, meaning what? That
we
it's
would
already
lease
federal land and you want it cheaply?
We would lease the
or it's-
land to them for, I believe in this case, it was 50 years or 100 years.
It's federal land that you would lease
Federal-
back at
yes.
at a low rate?
Yes.
Or no rate to help affordable housing?
Yes.
Okay. Mental health, can you, what efforts are you taking to turn that conversation? I know you had earlier this month, the Forest Service and the Interior Department held a summit to develop mental health resources for fire personnel. Now, how are you turning that conversation into action?
So we just started that. In fact, last week, Secretary Vilsack, as well as Secretary Holland, presented at this meeting that we had in Idaho. We also had a number of firefighting personnel that was present there as well. And at that meeting, we talked about the need and the support for the mental health care and well-being. And Senator, I've got to tell you that in my career, I've seen the underbelly of what can happen when things don't work out right. And I am deeply committed to trying to provide that mental care and well-being, both traumatic trauma care as well as when things don't go wrong, because it leaves a hole in not only the person, but that person's family and the colleagues that they work with. I have scars from that myself, and because of the scars that I have and what I've seen, I am deeply committed to trying to provide this necessary service to our firefighters and our
Thank you.
employees.
And I know my time is up, but this is essential. Not just the compensation and the benefits are key here, but also the housing and the mental health.
Yes.
So I would hope you'd come back to us to figure out how we can continue to work together on all three of those areas. But you're talking about it, and that is a key for us really addressing this issue. Now let's turn it into action. So thank you, Chief Moore. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Hickenlooper.
Thank you, Chair, and I admire the new haircut. As someone who got, obviously, the haircut on the same day, I think. You can have a
Just to change of pace.
mutual admiration society. Mr. Moore, appreciate all your work. Nice to see you again. Obviously, outdoor recreation plays a big part of, plays a large role in Colorado's economy. White River Forest, you've talked about several times, with 18 million visitors a year, more than 22,000 jobs, $1.6 billion in economic impact. I think that, you know, there's a lot of discussion now of opening an Office of Outdoor Recreation. 22 different states have offices of outdoor recreation, most of them connected to their economic development arms. I think Commerce might be able to create that Office of Outdoor Recreation, but they would have to work very, very closely with the Forest Service. You are such a large part, you guys in the BLM as well. Is that something you're open to and willing to put in some resources and personnel to try and make sure that if and when this Office of Outdoor Recreation gets stood up, that it can get the support, the interagency support that it needs?
Yeah, Senator, we'd be happy to always partner with communities and states in trying to really bring recognition to recreation and just the get outdoors type of a feel. You know, you said it, and it's true. Outdoor recreation provides a lot of not only economic benefit to this country, but also a spiritual benefit as well. You know, when you're able to get out and recreate. What we have found since the pandemic is that we have a lot more visitors visiting the National Forest. We have non-traditional visitors visiting the National Forest as well. You know, when the museums was closed, they needed to find somewhere to go. And so they found the outdoors, the National Forest, as one of those examples. So looking at recreation in general, it has been underfunded for quite some time now. And as we focus more on recreation and just really providing that release for our American people, we really need to work with all of our partners to help find solutions for how they can get outdoors and enjoy the great outdoors.
Right, and I couldn't agree more. Spiritual is a huge part of that value. Health, physical health as well, and in many countries, especially Scandinavian countries, the doctor will prescribe, 3 1-hour walks a week in forests to help someone's medical condition. So thank you for that. I think that's very exciting. And most states now have dedicated people towards trying to find more access points into the national forest. I know Colorado does. Hopefully we can find some resources too within your organization to get more parking lots and not have to spend 12 years doing a survey on that. The other point I want to talk about, you talked a little bit about the affordable housing and the 50 and 100-year leases, and I think that is a place where all over the country we're seeing this pinch. And I love that the Forest Service is willing to be part of that and the 50 to 100-year leases. I know that sometimes it's hard to keep everybody at the table. In other words, I think the local community, the counties, the municipalities all have to step up and contribute what they can and make sure that the value that they're creating stays owned by the community. In other words, isn't a 30-year or a 20-year benefit that suddenly becomes private housing. And I know that sometimes that gets in the way of some of your rules and regulations, and I'm hopeful that I'm sure you're aware of it, but that we can navigate that.
Yeah, we're finding that it's an increasingly difficult situation that we find ourselves in. And that's why if there's a solution to be discovered in this, we need to do this with the communities. And I think we need to be willing to, everyone needs to put a little skin in the game, so to speak, so that we can find solutions, because it's imperative that we have presence in these communities. In order to do that, we're going to need to be able to afford to live in these communities.
Right, exactly. Great, well, thank you. I'll yield back my 30 seconds remain. That's, I think, the largest I've yielded back. Not because I don't have a lot of questions, but the next question would take 20 minutes. I've got 3 other questions I'll submit in writing. Thank you. I'll yield back to the chair.
Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and give my questions now. Chief Moore, in the last 18 months, you've received a more than $250 million increase in annual appropriations. You had an additional $5.4 billion in the bipartisan infrastructure law. You've had an additional $5 billion in the Inflation Reduction Act. And I would like to know how you've spent it or how you're going to spend it. This is the 3rd hearing in a row where I'm pointing out your agency's ignoring a central requirement in the bipartisan infrastructure law. Work on the 10 million acres that your agency previously identified as being the most dangerous, and track your progress with a specific performance measure. The Forest Service is continuing to ignore both parts of this requirement. The Forest Service is obligating hundreds of millions of dollars, but not in the places required by the law. So, with regard to performance measures, last year, NBC News showed the same acres being reported as treated by the Forest Service more than 30 times in 4 years. Both the GAO and the OIG have said the Forest Service current measures are, quote, misleading and inaccurate. The OIG noted in her report, Congress and Forest Service management run the risk of making funding prioritization decisions based on inaccurate information. I think I can speak for all of us that Congress would like to make its funding decisions based on more accurate information, not less accurate. We know we need more proactive management in our national forests to restore their health and address fire risk. but as senators responsible for oversight of your agency, on behalf of all of us as Americans, we demand accountability for funding and given funding that we have given you. So my question would be, do you intend to adhere to the requirement of law?
Senator, in my opinion, we are adhering to the law.
You haven't given us any reports at all.
Be happy to
On
give you
it.
any report. In fact, we're keeping weekly reports of what we're able to do and what we're able to get accomplished. So we would be happy to provide
On
you.
the 10 million acres, the most at risk?
What we can give you more than 10 million acres if that's what you wish.
No, the law is very clear. I'll read the law to you, sir, again. I mean, the treatment of the federal land or Indian forest land or range land that has been identified as having a very high wildfire hazard potential, the Secretary of the Interior and the Secretary of Agriculture, acting through the Chief of the Forest Service, shall by not later than September 30th, 2027, conduct restoration treatments and improve the fire regime condition, class of 10 million acres that are located in the wildland-urban interface or a public drinking water source area.
So in the wildland public interface, we have just let a lot of the contracts out to the tune of about $200 million. And we actually pulled together tribal members and state members to look at the first 100 projects that came in for funding. So that has just been completed, and we are looking at working on the second round of projects. We're sending a proposal out, and I would ask that all of your constituents to look at the notice of forest projects that's coming out so you can compete for those projects.
Do you have a point person that we can put our committee staff on?
Yes.
Because we don't seem to be getting direct answers. We're getting a lot of runaround from y'all.
Mark Lichtenstein would be the
Mark, can
point
we-
person.
Okay, I'll have Brian. He'll be right with you, okay? My second question, the Forest Service reported that last year it only sold 2.9 million board feet of timber, almost 10% less than it sold 2 years ago. Despite the $10.4 billion appropriated above your increasing annual appropriations, we're producing less. I believe that many states are willing to share their staff and resources with you so they can help you carry out this work. Over the last 4 years, states have administered the sales for 1.1 billion board feet of Forest Service timber under your Good Neighbor Authority, and they have a proven track record of working. However, I understand that just $28 million of the bipartisan infrastructure law funding that has been allocated thus far for Good Neighbor Authority projects. So I'd like the Forest Service to take advantage of the staff and resources that many states have to offer with you in conjunction. So what portion of the $10.4 billion that Congress has provided to the Forest Service do you envision the states helping you manage?
So I can't answer that specifically, but what I can tell you, though, to your earlier point, is that we have not produced less timber than we have in the past. In fact, we're producing more than we have in the last 10 years. Now, we accomplished about 2.9 billion board feet in 2022. And a part of the reason that we didn't accomplish the 3 billion board feet that was our target is because of some of the fires that had happened that burned through some of the timber sales. This year, in 2023, our plan is to produce 3.4 billion board feet, and we are on track to achieve that. And next year, that's going up to 3.5, and then we're working toward a 4 billion board feet program. So we are, I think, being really productive in that arena.
I'm sorry, sir.
We're productive in that arena. The other thing that I've done, Senator, for the accountability piece is that I've given each region a target. And we're tracking that target every quarter to see how we're doing in terms of meeting that quarter. I've just had our mid-year reviews with all of our regional foresters. We're on target to achieve 3.4 billion. We may even go slightly over that.
So you basically are not in agreement with the 10% less than you sold 2 years ago. We got those numbers. We got those numbers from your.
I'm not in agreement that we're producing less than we have in the recent
Those
past.
numbers came from your request for your budget.
No, we achieved 2.9 billion board feet this past year. 2.9 billion.
Last year.
Yeah, last year, and 2022, the fiscal
That was
year
10%
2022.
less than you did 2 years ago.
Yeah, and I'm saying the reason we didn't exceed that is because of the fires and the storms that took place across this country.
All right. Senator King.
I'm going to start on deferred maintenance and talk to Mr. Lichtenstein. You've submitted answers, or the department submitted answers to questions a year ago that you have about $58 billion worth of capital assets. A rule of thumb is 1 to 4% of value of capital for maintenance. Yet your budget this year is, I think, 100 million. What gives? That's ridiculous. Are you expecting the Congress to bail you out every 10 years with the Great American Outdoors Act? You've got to stop digging the hole.
No, sir, we do not expect you to bail us out every year. Recognizing that the cost of deferred maintenance continue to grow and the value.
So why isn't more money in the budget for maintenance?
There are always difficult decisions to make. We are always trying to stay ahead
Yeah, and the
of our
easiest
maintenance
one
and
is to
prioritize
defer
our
maintenance,
efforts.
but that's not really a cut. All it is a moving of the expense further into the future.
Understood. I think we're in the same position as many other federal agencies in addressing our maintenance problems in terms of our overall asset inventory. So we're still working at analyzing our assets to make sure we're having the best assets available to meet those mission requirements.
Well, 100 million for a $58 billion asset base is an insult to the people of the United States. So I'm hoping that the administration can take this more seriously because, you know, the Great American Outdoors Act was a heavy lift around here.
Indeed.
And it's not something that we're going to be able to do every 2 or 3 years, particularly to make the case to our colleagues that we need more funding for deferred maintenance when the deferred maintenance is getting worse and worse.
And we do appreciate your work with the Great American Outdoors Act. It has made a significant impact on our ability to address those concerns.
Chief Moore, you were talking about harvest levels, 2.9 billion last year. I think in the 80s it was something like 13 billion. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, roughly 12 or so, yes.
So explain to me what's going on. I mean, one of the problems, the forest fire problem, of course, relates to climate and weather and drought and those kinds of things, but it also relates to a lot of slash and deadwood and small diameter trees on the ground because of a lack of harvesting. How has harvesting fallen by a factor of 5 in the last 25, 30 years?
Yes, so if we go back and, you know, it's really taken a historical perspective of the Forest Service and how it was working in the 80s and even prior to the 80s. And I think as a country, we were in a different place. I think in the 80s, the Forest Service brought in a number of ologists, if you will, to really look at doing some analysis on the NEPA that was being planned for these projects. And a part of the reason is because we were harvesting timber without the appropriate consideration for the resources. And
Do you think we were over-harvesting?
Well,
Is there any evidence, are there any studies that indicate that? If there are, I hope you'll supply them to the committee.
Well, it's more complex than that, Senator. It's a combination of is that we did not and are not removing the amount of vegetation that we have on the landscape. And that's part of the problem we have with these fires now.
Well, that's what I just said. So why aren't you increasing the harvest?
Well, we are trying
Why is the
to
harvest 10% of what it was, no, not 10%, about 20% of what it was 30 years ago?
Not 2 years ago. So I think our problem is twofold. You know, we're out trying to remove the vegetation. We do the work that we need to lay out the timber sales, and then fires sometimes rolls through the planned timber sale areas. We also have storms that takes place, whether it's in the south, the east, or the west, that also blow down areas that we've already laid out for timber sales, and so that gets in the way of some of this.
But a reduction from 13 to 2.9 is a huge reduction. We can talk about this in more extensive, perhaps we can meet together to talk about it. But the other piece that sort of relates to this is inventory analysis, knowing what we've got. Last year, we worked very hard to get an extra $10 million in the budget to do that. The current budget cuts that by $2 million. wouldn't it be nice to know what it is we have? That's the starting point for knowing what harvest levels should be. Why are we cutting the budget for inventory analysis?
Well, I am saying now, we know what we want to do, getting up to about 4 billion board feet, and which we expect to reach by fiscal year 2027.
Eisenhower retook Europe in 11 months. I'm not sure we need to wait 3 or 4 years to decide how much wood we're going to cut.
Well, we have to look at the infrastructure and our capacity and what our ability is. You know, over the last 15 to 20 years, we have lost over 40% of our non-fire workforce. And so if we're looking at building up the vegetation side of the house, we have to rebuild that infrastructure because it's missing. And so we are doing that, but we also are facing a lot of the problems that many others are facing. And I'll give you an example. Last year, we hired about 3,400 new employees, and we lost 2,600 through attrition. And so while we're trying to add capacity, there are other things going on where we are losing people through attrition. And so we're digging into why. But the bottom line, sir, is that we recognize in the wildfire crisis strategy recognizes that we need to remove more vegetation off the land.
We agree on that, and I understand the workforce. I just came from an armed services hearing exactly the same problem in the defense industrial base. So workforce is a real problem everywhere, and I do understand that, and I'm glad that you're moving forward on that front. But I do think that the combination of the fires and just the value that's being lost to the supply chain is significant. So I appreciate your testimony and your work and hope that we can continue to work together. Anything we can do to help on the workforce problem, you should let us know.
So, Senator, can I ask for your support in looking at wood innovations? Because when I look at, I mentioned
100%. 100%. That's one of the most important things we need to do. Things like CLT, for example. I'm totally in favor.
Yes.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Lee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to both of you for being here. Chief Moore, in 2018, the Weber Basin Water Conservancy District began planning with the NRCS to try to update infrastructure. The project would repair 7 storage facilities that provide water to communities below them, downstream from them. Then in 2019, the same Conservancy District began working with the Forest Service as a cooperating agency. Since then, they've needed 2 time request extensions, and the agency is saying that it will likely need to do a full EIS instead of relying on the original EA. So, Chief, I've read the applicable law. There is no need for an EIS here. There simply isn't. I'll have my staff reach out to yours, but will you commit to emphasizing with your agency that expediency is key with this project, especially as it relates to community water?
I will, Senator.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Now, we've seen for several decades a growing reluctance from land managers to permit authorized uses of federal land, often due to just minimal negative public feedback. And we've seen this with timber harvesting, certainly. We've seen it with mining, with grazing, and we've seen it with other activities as well. And we are also seeing it with recreation. Just this month, the Flagstaff Ranger District in Arizona canceled plans to issue 7 new permits to commercial guides just because some people wrote in concerned about Jeeps overrunning the area. But unfortunately, they completely missed the mark. The people who wrote in didn't seem to be informed at all by the actual proposal, which included rock climbing, mountain biking, and birding guides. So what can we do to increase the resiliency of our district offices to ensure that would-be users of public land aren't kept out by NIMBYism, especially in some cases, uninformed NIMBYism?
Yeah, so I'm not familiar with that particular case that you brought up, Senator, but I will certainly look into it and get back with you on that. Usually, in a case moving from EA to an EIS, it's really around an issue of significance, and I don't know what that might be without looking into it.
Yeah, if you take a look at 16 USC 1133D4, I think it'll get there, but my staff will touch base with yours to compare our arguments, and thank you for your commitment on that. Now, timber harvesting, I want to get back to that for a minute. I share concern expressed by others here today, and Senator King and I agree in a number of areas, and I think this is one of them. It's critical to managing our landscapes effectively, and it plays a really important role in the economies of rural communities, especially where there are lands that you manage. Unfortunately, timber outputs are far below the Forest Service's allowable sales quantities. What steps do you think that the Forest Service needs to take in order to attain harvest at the allowable sales quantities or even probable sales quantities?
Yeah, Senator, there's been a lot of concerns over the years with our ability to remove vegetation. Part of this resource is both money and people that we have not had. With Bill and IRA, we have an opportunity to really increase the amount of work that we're doing to remove vegetation, because we've said that that's one of the primary causes of the fire situation, disease and insects that we have, particularly across the West, is our inability to remove the amount of vegetation that is necessary in order to have a positive effect on fire behavior. So our wildfire crisis strategy is really designed around removing vegetation, and that's why we want to emphasize wood innovations, because a lot of our traditional mills don't have the capability to use small diameter, low-value material. So part of the bill monies is being used to retrofit some of our mills to be able to handle that. All of this to create new opportunities through things like was mentioned earlier, cross-laminated timber, biochar, biofuel, some of those types of things that we can begin to use. And we're seeing a lot of successes in both of these areas. And so we're really optimistic that we'll be able to provide a lot more of the vegetation resources that we have not in the past. And we're still trying to build capacity. We are having unique agreements with counties and states to really get at adding capacity, where county and state officials are helping us with timber sale layouts, marking, and some of those types of things. And so we are creating non-traditional partnerships with a lot of our folks at the local level. RC&D is another area where we are partnering with the resource conservation districts to do some of the NEPA work. So we are exploring that.
Thank you, Chief Moore. I see my time's expired, but I do want to thank you for your commitments on those, and I hope you'll continue to look at them. I do think that we're onto something here about the timber harvesting. I think that you do that right, it can help you with the wildfire problem. It can help you achieve balance when it comes to the stand density index. And you mess up the stand density index, you're at greater risk for wildfires, and it also tends to contribute to drought in states like mine. So thank you very much.
Thank you. It's your turn, I think. Senator Kelly.
I'm up. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Senator Lee, thank you. Perfect lead into my question on timber harvesting as well, and on Fry in Arizona. The Forest Initiative finally underway. It's getting into its implementation phase, and we're going to do this landscape scale restoration of this biggest ponderosa pine forest on the planet. So what does the timeline for implementation look like? And are there any anticipated roadblocks? And if there are, what are we going to do to get ahead of them?
So in fiscal year 2023, Senator, the forest, and I said the forest, but it's the four forests that comprises of Fry, received about $42 million from bill funding. And they're currently implementing timber, fuels, roads, bridge projects to support that land restoration project that we've been talking about earlier. Also included in that is about 47,000 acres of mechanical thinning, and we are putting the contract out this year. We also have, in addition to that, about 17,000 acres of has-fear reduction, and we're also planning to do about 100,000 acres of prescribed burn-in to complement that.
So you got the contracts on the 47,000 acres this year, and right now, so my understanding is the infrastructure needed to do this work is currently underway.
We believe so. We are constantly hiring personnel because that seems to be one of our biggest challenges there on bringing people on with the experience level that we need at that journey level. And where it's not, it takes time to train them. But one of the ways that we're supplementing that is by developing unique partnerships with some of our county and state officials to provide some of that expertise to work for the common good between the state, feds, and local level.
Okay, thank you. And since we're speaking of workforce, the firefighter compensation reform package included in the Forest Service fiscal year 24 request aims to help the workforce for the wildland firefighters by increasing, let me say permanently, increasing their pay, improving mental health and physical health support, and expanding housing options. So, Chief, if the proposed fiscal year 24 firefighter compensation reform package is not passed in Congress in this session, what would be the impact on the wildland firefighter workforce, and what would you have to do to mitigate for the downside of this?
Yeah, excellent question with the disaster of an outcome, Senator.
Literally a disaster. I mean, because we're talking about, wildfires that are natural disasters.
Wildfires, and we're talking about having a workforce that can respond to these fires. We've seen a number of occasions where whole communities have burned. If you don't have a workforce in place to be responsive to these fires, then you're going to see more of that sort of thing happening, God forbid. And so we think it's imperative that we're able to respond to these issues around our firefighter needs if we're going to have a workforce that's going to be responsive to our community needs.
Well, thank you. One last question, Chief. Last Congress, Senator Romney and I introduced the Wildland Fire Mitigation and Management Commission Act, which was signed into law as part of the bipartisan infrastructure law. This established a commission of federal, state, and local stakeholders to study and recommend new fire prevention, mitigation, management, and rehabilitation policies for forests and grasslands. And earlier this year, we saw the commission release the first part of their recommendations, and the full report is due in September. Is this timeline of the full report coming out in September correct? And how will the Forest Service work to evaluate and incorporate the recommendations of this commission?
I believe it will meet its intent. While we're not directly involved in it, we are involved from a distance, and we feel that so far from what we know, that these are good recommendations coming out of the commission.
And you feel like you'll be able to implement them?
I certainly hope so, but it's all going to boil down to whether we're funded to implement a lot of these types of issues. But the interest is there, the motivation is there. It's just a matter of do we have the resources to match that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Senator. And now we have Senator Murkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chief, good to see you again. Second time in a month, I guess, here. And last month at the appropriations a discussion, I asked you about tribal co-management and the Forest Service. Many of the tribes in Alaska, as you know, are leaders in self-governance. They're very interested in the opportunities that can be presented through tribal management and through co-management operations, specifically on the 638 contracts. So we have a farm bill in 2018 that authorized the 638 contracting for tribal forest restoration projects, but as we discussed, that authority is limited to projects on federal lands that bordering or adjacent to Indian forest or rangeland. So we did get some technical assistance from USDA that can perhaps help address these geographic limitations. but we're also trying to figure out a way to expand 638 contracting and compacting to some additional activities. So the question to you and your team is whether or not we will have the information or the legal reviews that we need to fix the existing 638 contracting authority that was in that prior farm bill, to be able to extend it, to be able to allow for compacting, so that we can utilize this in Alaska. Can you give me an update or a heads up on that?
Do you know where we are with that? I think that USDA may be a better source to provide that information, Senator. I don't have it.
Okay. I think that maybe this is an issue where both of you think that the other one is doing it. So let's follow up on this afterwards. We'll connect with USDA as well. But I just want to make sure that we don't miss this window. We've got the Farm Bill coming up. This obviously is an area of interest, not just for us in Alaska, but others as well. So.
And I would agree that this would be important, and I think would be really a good addition.
Good, thank you. Let's work on that. I also mentioned at the last hearing the Southeast Alaska Sustainable Strategy and USDA's initial commitment there, $25 million to address the situation in the Tongass. When this was announced, the $25 million was announced in July of 2021. It was underscored at that time and reinforced that this was an initial commitment to the region. So can you share with me where the Forest Service is requesting additional support for a Southeast Sustainable Strategy in the President's budget?
So I don't believe it's specifically marked out in the President's budget, Senator, but we do plan to provide resources to that project.
Can you share with me any expectation in terms of a timeline or what you're thinking about in terms of time and what the communities in the region might expect?
So I'll commit to you this year yet. In terms of the specifics, I'll follow up with you on that. But I will.
Okay. Well, again, we've got communities that, as you know, are struggling, as we have seen. Yet one more round of imposition of the roadless rule and the limitations that provides. I don't think that $25 million is adequate to address the decline that we see within the industry there, the timber industry in Southeast. And I think those of you in the Forest Service have concurred with my assessment of that. And so there's been a lot of promises, but we really haven't seen beyond that initial announcement that there's been additional follow-on. And so I will keep pressing to make sure that you know that we Alaskans were led to believe that that was an initial commitment to the region and that there will be more to come.
Before you leave that one, Senator,
Mm-hmm.
so can I follow with you next week? On
Yes.
the specifics of that?
Yeah, I'd look forward to that. Thank you, Chief. And then last question here, I've also raised previous the local hire and the incorporation of local knowledge in land management, super important for us in Alaska particularly, and empowering our tribes to partner as wildland firefighters is a pretty powerful tool for that. So any updates on what the service is doing to recruit and retain more tribal partners?
Yes, actually, I'm just told recently that we've just hired 100 of our tribal partners, and we are still going out for other opportunities for potential. But the region has been very optimistic and very happy to be able to bring that many of the tribal members on board. And so,
Good. Well, maybe as we do a follow-up in the next week or so on these other issues, you can provide me a little more detail on where we're seeing those additional hires. That's good news.
I'll be happy to.
Good, good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief.
Senator Barrasso? I'm sorry, you want?
No, thanks, Mr. Chair. A couple quick things. Chief Moore, on March 30th of this year, the Bureau of Land Management, Department of Interior, issued a proposed rule that seeks to lock Americans out of their public lands, effectively upending the agency's multiple-use mandate. This proposed rule was devised and written without any input from the critical partners and leaders on the ground. So Wyoming families, our local economies, depend on access to public lands for energy and critical mineral development, for grazing, for forest and timber management and recreation. So what I ask you is, to your knowledge, is the Forest Service or the Department of Agriculture in any way devising a similar rule for national forests and grasslands?
No, Senator, we're not.
Great. I want to follow up a little bit with what Senator King was talking about. The budget request that you came out with includes a $2 million cut to the roads line item, I have it right here, under capital improvements and maintenance. So when I go to this $2 million cut and read under it, forest system roads and bridges provide access for first responders in emergencies. Your own report says that a decrease of $2 million, which you're proposing, cutting it by $2 million, would reduce the capital improvements, would reduce maintenance on roads, maintenance on bridges, and it could negatively affect priority access work for fuel reductions and watershed health. All right. So you say that you cut $2 million, and we know it's going to be bad because it's going to cause these hardships. At the same time, your budget increases the facilities line item by $71 million, of which $60 million is for electric vehicle charging infrastructure. $60 million for electric vehicle charging infrastructure, but you're willing to cut roads and bridges for our first responders, for fuel reduction, and for watershed health, which is only, which is $2 million for that. You look at this and say, why is the Forest Service prioritizing electric vehicles over public safety and fighting forest fires and allowing first responders access to the area?
So I would never agree that it's a matter of choosing between the two. I think it's always just trying to balance out, emerging issues. And when we look at recreation and increased visitor use, and we look at some of the trends that are occurring in this country where more and more electric vehicles are being purchased, then we also want to be able to try and provide resources not only for that trend that we see in America, but also for our vehicles that we are starting to purchase that are electric in nature. So when visitors come to our national forests and our recreation facilities, we, in some locations, are wanting to put in plug-in opportunities so that they don't incidentally get stranded along the way. So it's just a trend that we're trying to be responsive to, Senator.
Well, I won't want to make it be a trend that we're willing to give up on fuel reduction and watershed health.
Yeah.
I mean, you sort of thought, well, you could have said, well, let's just not do that and only put $58 million into the other issue. But you didn't choose to do that. You did. The trend is to get rid of what we think we need is really important to do something. I would just say, I know that President Biden singularly focused on forcing every American into an electric vehicle, no matter the cost, no matter the consequences. That's his big deal. I would hope that you're going to fight against the rest of the administration's efforts to prioritize EVs over saving lives, over saving property, over forest health. If the loss of life and property isn't enough to convince the administration, maybe you can remind them that wildfires release massive amounts of carbon into the atmosphere, and preventing a forest fire, getting earlier access in there, is going to have a much bigger impact on carbon emissions than the vehicles coming into the forest. I mean, it just seems ridiculous.
That sounds like you're making a statement, sir, not necessarily a question.
Well, I would say, I would ask you, does what I'm saying make sense in terms of what you want to do for forest health?
Well, I think it's really vitally important for us to really look at forest health. I mean, we have a significant problem out there, and I had testified earlier that, in my opinion, we're in an emergency situation out on our lands, and that we need to prioritize that. And I think that we are to a large degree. We've said that this is an emergency situation. We are using all kinds of tools to indicate that it's an emergency situation. And I think that we are providing as much attention as we possibly can on this issue that we have out on our public lands.
So it certainly seems to me that in terms of what may be an emerging trend years from now mandated by the administration, clearly not needed for the emergent situation that I've heard you describe today, it does seem that there's a reallocation issue that I would prefer had gone a different direction. Let me just, one other area. In addition to managing forest landscapes, the agency also manages rangelands and grasslands. Ranching families in Wyoming and across the West partner with the Forest Service to ensure good stewardship over all of these lands. Revenues generated by grazing fees that are paid by our ranchers go into the Range Betterment Fund. This fund is used to help keep our range and grasslands in a healthy condition. My legislation, the Ranch Act, would effectively double this contribution without raising grazing fees or the deficit. The agency could be matching our ranchers' contributions with its own funds. This would demonstrate a more meaningful commitment from the agency to help improve rangeland health. Why isn't the Forest Service matching the funds that are put into this program by the ranchers?
I'm not familiar with that part of it, Senator. We certainly feel that range management is critically important, and particularly out west. And so I'd be happy to sit down with you to get ideas from you on what you think we could and should be doing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. I've just got one final question, and we'll wrap up. But Chief Moore, I noticed you're requesting a $52 million increase in your IT budget in order to accommodate telework. I believe physical attendance. You don't agree with that?
I would like for you to finish.
Well, I mean, I'm just horrible. People got to come to work. They're not coming to work. That's it in a nutshell. Just make me understand why you think they should be spending $52 million to make sure they don't come to work.
So the reason I was looking there, I'm not familiar with the $52 million to come to work. What I will say that OMB announced last week the order to come back to work. And so what we're doing now within the Department of Agriculture is working to develop a plan within the next 30 days to see what that would look like. In my case, for the Forest Service, within the department, what does that look like for the agency within the department? And so we've just recently put a team together as of this week, and we have began to work on what that would look like, coming back to work, what that would look like.
I'm just saying, we just picked it up out of your budget. It was said $52 million for IT, which I assume will be computers for people to take home and work from. Is that
Yeah, ideally, if we're going to be working from home, we need to provide the resources available to work from home. But keep in mind that that was there before this decision was made last week. And so we're going to have to make some adjustments based on the new decision that was made as of last week.
Yeah. Well, you all can check it in your own request. It's pretty plain.
I'm saying that request was before the announcement that was made last week, and so now we'll have to adjust that.
Let me make sure that you understand that a lot of us up here are hearing from groups that have long partnered in past administrations for the Forest Service. They're telling me part of the reason the Forest Service is not hitting so many of its targets is because employees are not coming to work.
But
it's not just in Forest Service, sir. We're hearing it across the board. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I would say that that's not true. In fact, our productivity has slightly increased. And keep in mind,
you ought to
Senator,
tell these people that
a lot of our field-going people never was really teleworking or remote working. They have been working through this entire pandemic. Where that has happened to a greater degree has been in our regional offices, our station office, and our national headquarters. It's where that has been generally. So the field going at that forest level and district level has always been at work.
No, I'm not talking. Yeah, I know what you're saying. As far as you're going to have your field work, we understand that. We're understanding that basically a lot of phones aren't getting answered, not just in yours, but so many agencies across federal government. Reports aren't being filed. Timeliness as far as getting anything done. People are waiting longer periods of time for any type of permit process or procedure just because people aren't showing up. You can take the IRS all the way through federal government. And then we're throwing money at it from the standpoint, I don't know if it's going to improve unless people are required to come to work or find another job. That's about it. So with that, I'll stop it there. I want to thank you all again for coming. Members are going to have until the close of business tomorrow to submit additional questions for the record, and the committee will stand adjourned.